And he did it again. And I caught him again. He meets me on an elevator. And I forget his exact wording, but he threatened me that I had better leave him alone. Instances where organized crime was involved, I had to testify with the FBI. That was rather nerve-wracking. The way the government does their books would never be accepted, ever, in any public accounting environment. They would be immediately arrested for fraud.
Hey, welcome to Tales from the Shift. Doug Carpenter, how are you doing today?
Good, very well. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here. So it's the first time we've had a CPA/CFA. First of all, I don't know the difference between the two, so obviously we're going to have to cover that. You want to break it down for us?
Sure. What a certified public accountant obviously is a specialist in accounting. Everyone assumes that an accountant knows tax. That may or may not be true. There's different areas of accounting as well. There's your bookkeeping, accounting. There's tax. There's also auditing. You could be in any. Most accountants are not auditors, but that's really how most of our CPAs get their start. They'll do some auditing and then they'll move on. But again, so accounting and tax are the focus. That's my focus, are both of those. But not every accountant does both. They may specialize in just the accounting side or just the tax side, but and then some like myself do both. As far as a CFA, that's a chartered financial analyst, that focuses in finance. That is working in things like portfolio management, asset management, institutional portfolio accounts, and things like that. So the combination between the two is good because accountants kind of come up with where the numbers come from, and financial analysts determine what to do with those numbers once they have them. So it kind of bridges that gap and allows me to go from beginning to end.
Okay. All right. And then, so I also understand you were at one point, the youngest stockbroker in the United States. So yeah, you got a hell of a background here from there. And then now CFO for a company.
Yeah, well, actually I was a CFO for 12 years with the New York Stock Exchange company, but I've owned my own accounting firm for 8 years. But yeah, back when I was 17, I had, no better thing to do than to go for my broker's license. It was something I was very interested in. I was investing since I was 10 years old and decided that was just something I wanted to do. I passed the Series 7. I was in high school and started working in the field. Found I hated it with a passion. It was very what I envisioned it was you helped people build their wealth. And what I found it to actually be was you're selling and trying to sell more and churn and burn kind of thing. That is not me. So that's really what drove me into accounting. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember there was a movie with Ben Affleck where they were, in the securities exchange, and it was definitely a sales thing, at least in the movie. It certainly showed that. So you moved on from there, and how did you end up getting into becoming a CPA?
Well, there's certain requirements. You have to go to a 4-year degree. There's other ways around it, but a 4-year degree, taking a CPA exam, having 2 years of audit experience. So I got that out of the way. Really didn't like audit. Basically, you're looking at someone else's work. They've done it. It's been checked. Then they hand it to you, and you check it again. But what you're doing is you're verifying. But one of the things that it does teach you early on is to, that kind of trust but verify kind of thing. So here are your numbers, but let's make sure. And, so the real thing that an auditor is doing is they're checking with independent sources. And at least they're supposed to be. So there's always a third party involved that's independent from your client that's verifying those numbers.
Okay. And how many years have you been involved with being a CPA/CFA?
Well, I got my CPA in 92. I got my CFA in 98. So it's been a lot of years that I've been doing both.
All right. How about workplace horror stories? Is there anything that has happened that you can remember in this career?
There's if you're looking, there's tons. It's usually, people I've worked for or something. I'll give you a horror story. It's really not going to teach you anything. It's just merely for interest. It was my first day as a CFO. My first CFO. It was a small company. It was an import-export company. Sold paper around the world. That's what we did. So we exported from places like Russia and Indonesia and so forth, to places like India and wherever it was needed. So my very first day on this job, I didn't know this, but my boss was insane, the guy who owned the company. And so I go in my first day, and I'm at the desk where someone who just the day before is working before me was fired. So he left and he was gone. I took his desk. I kind of move everything to the side and put my own stuff in there. And what had happened was he wasn't the CFO there. He was one of the salespeople. But the owner took him to lunch and fired him during lunch. And he wasn't allowed to come back and collect his personal things. And so what happened was he had a collection of fine fountain pens. And he had some of them at the office there. So he wanted them back. And he came in and asked, if he could get them back. Now, I had, of course, no problem. I don't know who this guy is, though, and everything else. So unfortunately, I brought my boss into this. He comes down. An argument immediately starts that everything that is in that office belongs to him. And personal effects, you've given them up once you've put them in the office. So this went back and forth for a good 5 or 10 minutes, almost became physical. He ultimately took the pens, opened the window, and threw them out the window. So New York City, 9th floor. They land on the street. Don't know if anyone's hit by these pens, but anyway, it goes out. They're all screaming they're going to call the police on each other. 5 minutes later, the police, they come down and there's like 5 squad cars in front of, like a SWAT team comes out of this. I don't know what's going on. I'm braced for anything. It turns out there was a prostitution ring down the street, and they were there to bust everybody in that. And that was going on. So anyway, that was my first 5 hours at this company.
Amazing. So your boss really hated this guy for some reason.
Yeah, he was actually a very nice guy. I got to know him a little bit later because other people knew him. I wound up meeting him outside of work. He was a very nice guy. It was my boss that was.
Okay, all right.
That I learned very quickly, and I got out of that job quickly, but that was my first CFO position.
Well, you got to think about that. I mean, if this goes down day one, I would already be thinking, is it my boss or is it this guy? Like, I got to know, because if it's the boss, we've got a problem.
Well, I was already thinking, job change on the way home. It's just bad first impression.
Okay. Is there any moment that you realized that what you thought a CPA was going to be ended up being not what you expected?
You know what? I think I've turned it, as far as I'm concerned, I turned it into what I expected it to be. And that is, I don't know. I know a lot of accountants kind of do what they're told type of thing. They'll follow an instructions on things. And of course I do that too. But what I really want accounting to be is to drive businesses forward, not just provide numbers. We do that. But we also want to take those numbers and actually use it to benefit your business. Use it to analyze problem areas, find opportunities through those numbers. And that can all be done with a good, solid analysis of numbers. So that's really what I thought a CPA does. That's what I do. I don't know what other CPAs do.
Okay. All right. Well, so can you walk us through just a typical day? Before you did the CFO, so it might be a little bit hard to disconnect that, but you walk in the door, what might happen? How might a day play out?
Well, the first thing you're going to do is check communications, emails, and other things. See if anything, that needs immediate attention. Usually it doesn't, but sometimes it does. Some tax notice or something comes in, and I know it's not serious, but the client doesn't know that. Usually. Sometimes it is serious, but usually it's not. The worst is when they get an audit notice. I try and answer them within 5 minutes because I know it doesn't mean anything. We'll get through an audit or whatever else, unless they've done something terrible. But they usually haven't. But I know they're worried. I know they're not going to sleep once this thing arrives. So the first thing we want to do is reassure. I want to get in touch with that kind of thing. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. The other thing I'm looking for is concerns and other things. And then we also want to stay ahead of our schedule. So If things are due in 5 or 6 days, we want to make sure that that's planned properly, like sales tax payments and things like that we'll do. Want to make sure that all my team is on that and it's been done. We like to get things done in advance. Last day is not when we do things. Like to do things at least a week in advance. So what we generally say is the deadline is a week before the deadline. So this way there's nothing rushed. And it also gives us time to look and verify, if you send a check to the government, did they cash it? Did the payment go through? And if it doesn't, there may be a problem. You've got 5 days left to work that out. So that's a typical morning. And then what we'll start doing, it depends really on the day. I'll review people's work. If I have extra time, I'll go in and I'll just kind of spot check different financials. Often I'll have a call with a client or two to go over what their results are. I do quarterly calls with a lot of my clients, and that kind of stacks up after a while. So we do a lot of that. And then, it's phone calls and sometimes podcasts.
Thank you for that. How about you said audit? You made me think, how often do you get a client, have you had a client where they're trying to cover things up? Like, oh, I don't want to admit this. I don't want to show this. Is that pretty common, uncommon? What have you dealt with there?
I wouldn't say it's very common. That may be a client we don't want to work with. We have certain standards. We absolutely maintain this. I've lost clients, big client, actually one. I shouldn't say I lost them. We never took them on. But we weren't a good fit because they like to do a lot of things in cash. Whether it benefited them or not, my own personal feeling is each partner was stealing from the other partner. It was just a question of how much. And it was just a big mess. And, often what I find, what's very interesting is people may want to cheat or have cheated on their taxes. But we find out with the right tax planning, they could save even more money than they're cheating. It's just, you got to do tax planning and the right, the right things. So, always do it right, sleep well at night. Don't try to hide things. It's there for a reason. One thing I always do say, if you owe the tax, pay the tax. If you owe someone, you owe a partner, pay the partner. The other thing that we've butted heads with is sometimes we'll get a minority partner. They own 5 or 10% of the business. We have a fiduciary responsibility to them as well. So it's not just a 90% partner. They're, why did you tell them this? Well, they're a partner in your business. They're entitled to this information.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. When you say, why did you tell them about this? When you go see an attorney, they're not going to reveal anything about you, to anyone else. Do you have something like that as a CPA with your client as far as keeping things confidential?
There is a certain confidentiality, absolutely. If a person is a partner in a business, they are our client. That's part of it. It's all one big thing. Some people think we're kind of like the police. We're not. If you come in and confess that you've cheated on your taxes the last 20 years, I don't go out and report that to the IRS. That's confidential. However, if the IRS comes and asks me, I have no privilege on that conversation, whereas an attorney does.
Right. Okay. All right. Excellent. What about the worst day or the best day or both that you ever experienced on this job?
One time I had to fire 20 people the day before Thanksgiving. That was, they all knew it was coming, but I had to make it official. And that was probably the worst day. Mutual sympathy there. I wasn't far behind them. The company was going out of business, but it was just the timing was terrible. I think everybody thought it was going to last at least into the beginning of the next year, and it wasn't happening. So that one was bad. Best days are, sometimes you hire the right people, or you find the right thing. I can't say there's a best, but some of the good things is when you really find something, find a great tax loophole that they can use, find something that really benefits a client. That's a good feeling. You feel like you've really earned your time and your money.
What do you think? Do you have an opinion about tax loopholes? Do you think the whole thing should be simplified? Do you think the loopholes are great to have in there? What What do you think?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I mean, I make a lot of money through tax loopholes. Pointing them out to people and helping them. Absolutely, the tax code should be simplified, no question about it. But it's not going to be. There's always special interests and other things. It just gets more and more complicated as you go. Every tax rule has a caveat to it, and then a caveat to the caveat. There's just a lot. There's a lot to know in those. But I think that overall, as long as you're doing legal things, I mean, there's a saying, billionaires don't pay taxes. I disagree with that. Billionaires don't overpay their taxes. And, you shouldn't either. If there's something you're entitled to, it's in the tax law, take it. I'm not saying be ridiculously aggressive, but if it's there, take advantage of it. I hear some people, they do have a home office. It's a legitimate home office. It's 4 walls and they do what they do. Say, I don't want to write that off. I'll get audited. That's not the mentality approach. You're entitled to certain deductions there because you're using your home as your office. Take them, but if the audit comes, bring it on. We'll give the information and you'll pass, and that'll be the end of it.
All right. Okay. Have you ever felt unsafe in the job at any point?
I can say yes, I have. I've been threatened on multiple occasions. One time I had a partner in a very large CPA firm, and he was double and triple billing expenses. He was a rather high up partner in this company. And I caught him. I was asked to do an internal audit. It was plain as day. And so he did it a couple of weeks later. He resubmitted expense reports. We're talking thousands of dollars here. Resubmitted, and he did it again. And I caught him again. And he meets me on an elevator. We just happened to get on the same elevator. And I forget his exact wording, but he threatened me that, that I had better leave him alone. Whether that meant career-wise or physically, I'm not sure. But yeah, so I've had that. I've had other instances too. But
I mean, what he was doing, isn't that a crime I mean, it's a version of fraud, right? Double and triple billing?
Yeah, basically, he claims it was a mistake and whatever else. He was also bringing a lot of business to the company. So, but they didn't want him doing that. So he got disciplined for it. It really ticked him off. And
wow,
that was that. This was in my junior accounting days. I mean, I was, 4 years out of college.
Yeah. All right, so what about other times you might have felt unsafe?
I've had, I don't want to get into too much, but I've had instances where organized crime was involved, fraud with organized crime, and I was involved in the forensic accounting of that. And that I had to testify with the FBI, and that was rather nerve-wracking.
So how would you get involved with forensic accounting as a CPA?
There's a lot of reasons why you would go. You could potentially go back. You're basically putting records here. There's a lot of reasons, a lot of different things. You could have companies that are in bankruptcy, and you're looking to see what happened, what debts they may have, what they actually owe. If they're usually a company that's in bankruptcy has miserable books, they tend to go hand in hand, and you don't even know what their debts are. They don't have them organized, so you've got to go in and do that. There's divorce cases where you're looking for assets. I've done that type of work. There's all kinds of stuff. There's fraud that's been committed, and you want to go back and see what happened.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. That's a lot. So you found people are hiding assets here and there occasionally?
Yeah. I mean, that's it. It's almost like a no kidding, everyone, in that all of a sudden, businesses that were very profitable suddenly aren't making a dime, that suddenly, and believe me, I have sympathy for both sides, but what I really want to get to is the truth. That's, one side claims up here and the other side claims down here. And, what you want to find out is what actually is taking place or took place. And things are explainable. Listen, if a business tanked, it can be explained. But what you find is a new business was opened up somewhere else and business was diverted there. And, You can't do that. That's, these are things. I mean, that's the type of stuff that you find. Everything can be traced by money. I can tell you what you had for breakfast by looking at your credit cards. I mean, everything is traceable to money.
Is there any way that this job has made you a more cynical person, or maybe the opposite, a more hopeful person?
You know what? I think it's made me more hopeful. And the reason being is, my own style. I mean, one of the things I am most proud of is, as a CFO, I was a CFO of a public company 12 years. In that time, we had multiple accounting departments across the country that I was running. And all in that time, not one employee that I had working under me left for another job. I kept every single. Now I terminated lots of people that came in and just didn't work out. But voluntarily, I never lost a single person.
That's amazing. Okay. Is there a specific case, perhaps, that you've dealt with on this job that you still think about?
I had a very good business lesson one time. I had an executive position, and sitting at my first board meeting, I was like 29 years old, and thinking, hey, this is great. I mean, I'm around people with all gray hair like me now. And, this was just fab, totally full of myself. And we go through this meeting, and they're talking about sourcing materials from Indonesia and shipping them out, around the world and the whole thing. Okay, great. Everyone takes notes. Wonderful. Month later, we get together, same board together, and people have, different things to say about the Indonesian market, and they have a study and everything else. I've got nothing. And comes to me, and they said, well, have you gotten in touch with any banks? Because, the CFO, you're going to need banking connections to get lines of credit extending from Indonesia and make this business happen. And I had nothing. And the chairman said, stay after the meeting. So I did. And he said, I'm going to give you one pass. This is your one pass. He said, let me tell you the difference between a manager and an executive. A manager does what they're told. An executive doesn't need to be told. And I never forgot that.
That's great words of advice.
Yes. And that's really what you want to know is that, you figure it out. That's what an executive leads. You figure it out. You anticipate the problem. You pave the way. No one's telling you what to do.
Yeah. Very cool. All right. What is something that's cool or enjoyable about being a CPA that maybe you were kind of surprised to learn about after you got involved? Let's say a benefit, if you will.
I think how close you can come to clients. You really get to know them. There's kind of it really becomes, I'm not going to say it's a friendship, but it's something in the middle of a business relationship and a friendship. It's, you really get to know them. You kind of feel their bumps when they have them. You can be that person they can talk to about the business. And I just, it's surprising how close you can get with some of your clients.
I would imagine as a CPA, you could end up working in an office where you're the only CPA, or maybe there's 100 of them. What types of places have you worked? Have you been the only person or been in groups of them?
It is funny you say that, because I've obviously worked in places where there's, CPAs at every desk. But actually, I was with a top 4 accounting firm. I was in the consulting division, and I was the only CPA in an 800-person IT consulting division. They just didn't hire CPAs, but somehow I wound up in the middle of this thing. Now, the interesting thing, and this was rather earlier in my career, what's interesting is IT people tend to look down on accountants. You're really not that. You're just an accountant. However, boy, do they need you on their projects. It is because every IT project has accounting in there somewhere. It just does. And I felt like one of those dolls that just gets ripped apart from limb to limb as they tried to get me on different projects. I wound up being 3-4 projects at once. I had the highest billable time of any person there in their history. It's like 135% for like 3 years straight. It was crazy. And that's just part. So when you're the only CPA, the amount of expertise they're trying to draw from you, both taxes you and stretches you.
Really? All right. So you said you have worked at places where you are with other CPAs.
Yep.
What is that environment like? What is it like working with other CPAs? Is it fun? Is it cooperative? Is it toxic? What do you think?
You know what? I found it to be somewhat fun. If you make it, it depends. Some of them are very a little cliquey. They tend to be cliquish, and I don't know why, but they just are. I was never that type. I always tried to make work a little bit. It has to be fun. Yeah, you have to have some fun.
Sure.
And I've done that in the past with other jobs. The CFO job I had, we had a great time. We'd come in. I mean, it was anything but boring. We did what we had to do. We got all the work done, but you also have to have some fun doing it. So that's always.
Yeah. Okay, Doug. So I have a question about a shortage of CPAs. When I was doing research for this, it seemed like that was coming up, that in the United States, there's a shortage. Firms are trying to offshore some of their work. Can you tell us about that? What's going on?
Yeah, there's really two aspects to that, and I'm kind of passionate about this. Way back when, they decided to come up with the genius idea of making CPAs, to go through a 5-year program instead of a 4-year program. The moment they suggested it, I thought that was a bad idea, because I'll tell you, I wouldn't have gone into accounting if it was 5 years. I would have done finance or computers and never touched accounting. That extra year of schooling and everything, just first of all, I don't think it does anything for you. You're really going to learn in the field. That's where you get your knowledge from. It's not from a textbook. You got to do it. You got to sit there and actually go through it. Major mistake in doing that, in extending those educational requirements. I knew there'd be a shortage the moment they announced it. So 20 years hence, we have a big shortage of CPAs. No joke, no kidding. No surprise either. The other side of that coin, though, is the knowledge that accountants have. I worked for a guy, when my first job, I was in college in accounting. He could add numbers upside down. You could look for across the table and add numbers. That's what he did. It was 18-column paper, and you had everything physically written out. Now, I was lucky enough to begin my career in that 18-column era before computers took over. So I got a good 10 years or so of doing that and working it through. It took really, honestly, about 18 months for accounting to click, to really click, the whole theory, to understand it. And then once you do that, there's really nothing that you can't handle. It make everything has a place. You understand it. But until that happens, you make every mistake under the book. So, but the thing is that today's accountants don't have that anymore. They come in, they look at QuickBooks, they input a bunch of stuff, it spits out financials. They don't even know what they're looking at. They don't know what's going in. They don't understand the journal entries behind it, the mechanics, what's actually taking place within those numbers. If I wanted to go from cash to accrual, that's a big deal in accounting. It's a big process. You're basically going from just where your cash went to all the journal entries that make liabilities and assets that took place during the time period. Today in QuickBooks, they have a little button, cash accrual. You click it, you're on cash, click it back, you're back to accrual. That's great. Back in my day, that was a day-long project. You'd pull out the finance. That was a day long, and you'd sit there and you'd do this. But you know what? I understand the absolute difference between the two. But you ask any accountant under the age of 40, they're not going to have that. They never have done that. And everyone that comes in that I hire new, I know I have to train them from the ground up. It's the concepts aren't there, and it really takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And even then, it's still, I look at something, I'm like, how do you miss that? How do you see a negative here and not question it? That's the first thing you need to do is look, that's out of place. Ask a question. And I find that the instinct is no longer there. And that's the biggest problem.
Almost, it makes me think of the AI situation. It sounds like the problem you're describing is probably going to get even worse as they start handing it over to more tools, well, then what if the tool is wrong? How are you going to figure out what went wrong, I guess?
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And you know what? What I just described in accounting will now infect all the other careers through AI. People have to think. You have to understand what you're doing, not just do it.
I agree 100%. Let's talk about what is the PCAOB. I guess this is important in your career, and apparently they're pushing for tougher audit standards that would make individual accountants more liable for errors. Can you tell us about that?
Okay, well, basically what they are is an oversight board to tell us how we should conduct audits. The problem with audit is you're not living in an environment. You're just sampling. So you can make the standards tougher. Maybe you should. It depends on the areas that you're looking at. I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. You have a warehouse with $200 million worth of stuff in it. Okay. You're not going to count all that stuff. Someone else is going to have an inventory and count that stuff, but an auditor's not going to come in and count every single one. What they're going to do is they're going to take the sheet of someone who counted. They're going to randomly pick some of those sheets and say, okay, you said there were 120 of these, show me. And they'll show you 120, and great. And then there's 5 of these, you show them 5 of those, that's fantastic. Now, if there's 10 listed and they can only show you 9, that's a problem. Even though it's only one, it's not what was on the sheet. Now you have to extend it. Before you maybe sample 10 items, now you have to do 50. And if, say, 2 more of those fail, now you have to have a recount and you have to redo it. So that's basically the procedure. There's other things too. But I don't necessarily think, stricter standards on that is going to make that much of a difference. I think more analytics would make a difference. So, explaining why you have variances, explaining things that went up and down. I'll give you an example of this. Someone wanted to buy a local burger place near me. And they came to me to I'm not going to say audit the books because that's a whole certification process, but tell them if what the seller was telling him was correct. I've eaten at the place. I know it. Good burgers. And what I found was there was a variance in the cost of goods sold. And I said, you got to ask about that. How come now it's cheaper than it was, where I know food prices went up? Well, it turned out they actually made the patty an ounce smaller than they were. I could find this through the numbers. This was in analysis. This accountant tells a story. And I think that they are over heavy on I definitely think the inspection and the actual physical verifications are completely important. But the secondary aspect is that analytics, and they do analytics too, but sometimes it's just, one of the questions I was asked by an auditor once was, how come sales fluctuate every day? Imagine that.
I don't know, because the customer.
Because you have different customers, different orders, that's what it does. And I looked at them, are you for real? Why would you? Well, it says it in my audit book that I should ask the question. So you're not thinking. It tells me you're just not thinking. You're following a schedule. Of course, unless you're in a very particular type of business, your sales are going to fluctuate every single day.
Right. Okay. Sorry, it took me for a second to answer. I didn't know if there was going to be a quiz.
Oh,
I was like, wait a minute.
It was not a trick question. No, it was a ridiculous question.
It's okay.
We sold $30 million a month in product, and I'm being asked, how come the sales fluctuate every day? It's not the same number every day.
What's something that you learned doing this job that wasn't in any books and it wasn't in any training?
Honestly, I thought it would be more tedious. I liked accounting because, you could make a steady income. It was a good career. I could maybe get a little bit more into finance with it. But what I found, it's not as tedious. There's a lot more to it. There's a lot more understanding. You need to think a lot more than you might, you think it has a little bit to do with numbers. People say, I'm not good with numbers. Doesn't mean you wouldn't be a good accountant. You don't have to know trigonometry. I wasn't great at math. I wasn't. But, that higher level math has nothing to do with accounting. It works its way into finance. But, in just strictly numbers, no. There's a lot more creativity in accounting than you might think.
All right. Let's talk about pay. So if someone wanted to become an accountant, what could they expect to make the beginning of a career, and then all the way up through the years? What do you think?
I think you could probably expect something around in the 60s to start. It's a good career. There's a lot of jobs out there. I would encourage people that if they want to, again, the problem is really learn accounting. Don't just go through. You're not going to learn it in your courses. You're probably not going to even learn it at work, whereas usually that's where you could learn it. You went to your work, but always understand why you're doing something. What is going on behind what you're doing? Try to really think it through, and that's important. But once you get there, there's a pretty steady career ladder. There's a lot of options available to you. You can, generally you rise. You start as a junior accountant. You work your way up to senior, then to manager, senior manager, partner. That's a typical public accounting. That's auditing. That's typical public accounting career path. In the private sector, which generally pays more, in the private sector, you'll work in accounting departments. You'll become a manager. A lot of people stay at manager. I think I was told in my career I had a choice really to specialize or to generalize. And I decided to generalize in a major way. To get good at a lot of things. But the problem with that is you've got to kind of take steps down repeatedly. So you learn something, you're just about to make manager, and you don't. You go somewhere else to learn something else. To leave accounting, go into consulting and do IT. Get to the point where you're almost close to manager, go do something, learn it again. However, when you do that, you can jump over manager and become executive, because you now have an executive needs multiple skills. A manager needs a high level in one skill. Usually an executive requires multiple skills. Not always. Lots of people would disagree with me. That's been my experience, is that by generalizing, it's harder to break through the manager level, but it's much easier to get above that.
Interesting. So that's ultimately how you end up in a CFO position?
Yep. I've never really been a manager. I jumped over that, but I started from about 17 to 30. I had maybe 4 different career paths that I followed just to learn what they do. It was in accounting, it was in finance, it was in systems, and then finally putting it together, project management. That's managing people on projects.
What about your work hours? Are accountants always 9 to 5, or what have you experienced?
You know what? I would say accountants generally, the typical stereotypical accountant is going to have a 9 to 5 some of the year, and during tax season, you're going to work crazy hours. And I certainly did. That probably defined the earlier part of my career. Crazy hours is defined as maybe 7 in the morning till 7 or 8 o'clock at night, 6 days a week. That's wow. Crazy hours. But more typically, in my own firm, we're pretty relaxed. We have a hybrid environment. We go in 1 day a week. We're all together. We exchange ideas, do the things that we need to do. Everyone works from home the rest of the time. You need the right people who can do that. But that's worked out very well for us. I find that, and I've been in these environments, that it's not just a lot of times entrepreneurs rank you on how much time you're sitting at your desk. That if you're there till 8 o'clock at night, you're doing a great job. And that's just not, I don't care if magic fairies come in and do the work for my employees. Got to get done. I don't care if they have to do it on the weekends. It's got to get done. But how they do it, when they do it, just as long as it gets done. Don't really care. Accountants also tend to be late to rise, late to leave. So you'll find what I found later in my career, the typical accounting team drifts in about 9:10, 9:15, and works till 8 o'clock at night. 9 to 8,
that's a long time. So
I guess it is. But that's kind of why you come in late. You come in a little bit late because you're just not going to leave in the middle of a job, in the middle of a project. That's saying accounting kind of gets you. You want to finish the job, you want to finish the thing you're working on, and it's going to take you past 5. So,
what, if anything, have you had to sacrifice or give up to be successful in this career field?
You know what? You do have to be dedicated. I would say earlier in my career, I put in a lot of time. I did a lot of things outside of the job as well, like studying for the CFA. That was no small feat. That's a 3-year program. It's it has a very low passing rate. It's a very difficult thing to get. And that was something. It's 6 months of studying for each level. The levels are a year apart. There are 3 levels. So it's that requires dedication on top of what you're doing. But you know what? I can't say I've given up all that much. It's, if anything, it's been a good career to have. It does give you some flexibility. A lot if you own your own firm. There's a lot of things you can do. And so, no, I can't say I've given up a tremendous amount.
Okay. I am curious a little bit more about the CFA thing. You said that you're talking 3 years of work to accomplish it. Why would someone want to do it? What are they going to gain?
That's funny. I ask myself that sometimes. It's you know what? I'll tell you, the CFA program in itself was, to me, very valuable in what I learned in it. The body of knowledge was very beneficial. There are a lot of things in it. It was worth studying. The CPA, not putting it down, but it's studying for a test. That's what you're doing. You're studying for a test. The CFA, you've got to know it. You've got to know it cold. I don't know what they do today, but back when I took the exam, 2 of the levels were essays. They were 6 hours of essays, and you had to know this. It was brutal, and so you couldn't fake it. You couldn't guess the right answer. You either knew it or you moved on. If you didn't know it, they say drop the question, go to the next one. Because you don't have time to finish the exam anyway. They don't give you enough time to finish. They just want to see what you know. It's got a rather low passing rate. It's a very, very tough program. But what you get out of it is you learn a lot. You become a more full professional. I didn't get an MBA, and they say it's similar to an MBA. You have an easier time if you did get an MBA. But I found it like what I learned from it was well worth it.
Okay. So just to summarize, why a CPA would want to get the CFA is why?
It'll just extend your knowledge past accounting. It'll make you start thinking about what to do with those numbers. Time value of money, things that, when a client gets a loan, is it, what's the real cost of that loan? What's the benefit? You never want to do anything in a business just to do it. So, someone will say, should I get a loan to expand my business? Well, there's an equation that goes there. There's an actual mathematical equation that answers that question. CFA is going to tell you how to do that.
Is there a type of person that you would say that this career is for, or definitely not for?
It's not a bad career for people that are a little bit introverted, on the introverted side. It allows you to kind of think, contemplate. I think if you like logic, people that are logical, accounting's a good career. Everything is kind of absolute. If you like math, you don't have to be definitely good at it, but if you like math, it's a career that's definitely open to you. If you're not able to really sit still, you find your mind wanders a lot. My mind wanders a lot, but somehow I manage to do this. But that may not be the best career. You do have to be able to sit and concentrate and figure things out.
Yeah. To what extent? So if you can recall back to going to school, do you remember to what extent math classes, how far you had to get through it? I know my son is a computer programmer, and basically it was a math degree. So they pretty much had to do everything. How far deep did you have to go?
I would say by the time I hit 9th grade, Math 9, algebra, is as far as I've ever needed, ever.
Oh.
And even that's stretching it in accounting.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's very surprising. Okay.
Engineering, sure, you need all that stuff way up top. Physics, definitely. Accounting, no, it's basic, very basic.
Let's say you had a child comes to you, a young person, and they say they want to be an accountant. What would you tell them to do? What would be the path you would say to you how to pull it off?
The first thing I'd say is find a good college. That's start with that. While you're in college, get a job with a very small firm. Don't shoot for the stars. One of the things, I didn't get a job out of college with a top accounting firm. I worked for one that was about 100 people. Best thing that ever happened to me. I can run rings today around anybody who had those top jobs. I wound up working for one of those companies. It was after I had my foundation in accounting. So you don't learn that in a big company. You become a little cog in the wheel. You're not learning the whole mechanism. Go to a small company, do a little bit of everything. That would be the key is get involved in all the little pieces. You can go to a sole practitioner that needs one accountant to do everything for them. That's the right job to have in college.
Okay. What about other jobs? What might being an accountant lead to?
You do there's a lot of different things. Executive position, CFO, of course. You can, there's all kinds of things you can manage. It extends to a lot of different things. It may not necessarily be just accounting. Scheduling, you can run, there's consulting you can do, there's all types of things. The accounting field itself is also quite vast, like forensic accounting. There's different aspects of it. There's cost accounting, there's taxation, there's all kinds of areas that you can fall into that, each field, each industry has its own little specialties in it. I've touched just about each one at some point in my career, kind of probably not surprising. Real estate, construction, did manufacturing. That was the company I was with for 12 years. That was manufacturing. I owned a hedge fund administration firm at one time, did finance, all that kind of stuff, hedge funds. The one area I didn't have accounting in was hospitality sector. And then I bought an accounting firm. That specialty was hospitality. So for the last 8 years, that has been my specialty. So I think I got it all rounded out. I don't think there's an area. And you know what I found? There's a big lack of people doing nonprofits. And I kind of got sucked into the nonprofit sector just by way of people needed it. If you come, could you handle it? Sorry, I'll give it a shot. And so I've gotten good at nonprofits as well. So that was an area I never intended to. So maybe the only area I can't handle, which I wouldn't do, is government accounting. It's an entirely different type of accounting. That's another specialty.
So when you mean government accounting, you mean someone who works for the government, or are you saying something else?
The way the government does their books would never be accepted ever in any public accounting environment. They would be immediately arrested for fraud if they published books the way the government publishes their books.
Can you tell us more about that? Because you really piqued my interest as to what you mean by all this.
A good example might be the lotteries. The lottery funds schools. Isn't that wonderful? When you buy a lottery ticket, it funds the schools. Well, what you don't know is the money that would have gone to schools goes somewhere else. And now they use the lottery money. So the lottery, in essence, is indirectly funding something you never intended. But they can tell you it funds schools.
So in the real world, this would be a misappropriation of funds.
Yes,
right?
Pretty much. And there's a ton of different things. Liabilities aren't shown. I mean, the liability for Medicare and Social Security and all that, where's that $100 trillion in liability on our books? It isn't there. You don't see it. It exists, but it's not listed anywhere.
Okay. So other government employees would be people that work at the IRS.
Yep,
they have CPAs.
And that's not what I meant by government accounting. People who work in the government. Yeah, I know lots of people that work for the IRS, or there's a lot of state audit offices as well. State sales tax is a big one. I actually think they do a good job. They do a lot of audits. You're far more likely to get a sales tax audit than an IRS audit. And they usually do fine stuff. That's just, it's just what they do. They're very good at it.
What do you mean by a sales tax audit? What is that?
Okay. So there are lots of different taxes out there. I could go on for like 10 hours with this stuff, but there's a lot of different taxes out there. It's not just the IRS. Okay, that's only one. You also have state taxes. There's 50 of those. Few less because, you have Florida goes into the state tax, whatever. Okay, there's 50 of those. Then you've got sales tax. You've got real estate tax. You've got all kinds of other. You've got in New York City, we have a transportation tax. There's commercial rent tax. There's all kinds of taxes. Every one of those has an agency, and every one of those agencies has auditors. And, so they go out and they make sure that people are paying the right amount of taxes. In New York in particular, but I've found this in other jurisdictions, probably the most aggressive one out there is the sales tax. It's not, I don't fault them. I don't say they're wrong. It's very, very easy to miscalculate your sales tax because it's complicated. You have all kinds of products being sold. You have different jurisdictions. Very easy to miscalculate it. And they come in and they do audits and they usually find $1,000 or something, whatever it is. But they do. And so I'd say you have a 50-50 chance of getting a sales tax audit in any given year. Whereas the IRS, it's a 1 in 500.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the only time I've been audited was from my state, and they didn't like something that was along with a tax. Yep. Yeah. Okay. Do you think that there are any of these? You said you have many different departments. They have auditors. Do you think there's any that overstep their bounds that kind of do it in an aggressive manner to try and bring in more money than maybe they should be?
Honestly, no. I find. You have to be careful. You kind of get what you give. If you withhold information or you're slow, they're going to come at you very aggressively. The best way to handle it is be forthcoming, be honest. You shouldn't have done anything wrong in the first place, but if you have, come forward. Don't let them find it. That's the right way to handle it. It'll cost you. You'll pay interest and penalties, but that's as far as it'll go. What I do find, the only time I've found it's maybe a little aggressive is they'll open up additional audit periods when they find something, and that can be a real pain. But you just went through a lengthy audit with a lot of information. Now they've opened up much more, and they just keep going and going and going, and it happens. We deal with it.
So what are some of the most important elements to bring to the workplace as an executive?
I think a sense of fairness is probably one of the most, one of the key things. That I think overall is very important. I think it's important that there's a lot to it. People are complex, are very complicated. There's no real simple answer to them. Again, I don't lose people that work for me. They tend to stay. It's an important balance. It doesn't mean you are a pushover or something, because the problem is if you're lenient on people who don't pull their weight, then the people who do are going to have a problem with that, as they should. So there's always a balance with people. You want to create a good environment, one that people enjoy being at. They do that through things. There's a self-worth. Are they contributing? People don't just want to be locked in a box and do nothing. They come to work to do something. They like to be stretched. I find not everybody wants to learn. Some people want to finish their career doing the exact same thing. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. You need people like that. However, other people really want to learn. And, that's important too. So we go out and we, you maybe get them educational courses, teach them when I can, bring them into my office, show them things. That's part of it. Every now and then, I think the toughest thing to deal with is when people have internal disputes. That's a tough one because there's two sides to every coin. Usually both are wrong in some way. And you really have to figure out what the facts are. I learned this from another boss of mine. It's a good thing when people come in and they complain. There's two ways of handling that. Number one is empower them to find a solution. I had somebody that complained they had bad computer. This goes back to the 90s. Bad computer. I said, okay, you have $1,000 budget. Go out and get a better computer. Never heard from them again. Never heard the complaint again. They never bought another computer. That was it. So, empower them to solve their own problem. That's one. But the other thing is kind of the blowing smoke. People come in, oh, this person, they're not doing their work. They don't do this. Give me an example. Make it concrete. What's the example? Well, you're just blowing smoke. I need absolute concrete. Tell me what it is. The answer may be you just don't like them. That's, that may be, and there's not, that's not a crime.
Not yet. What would you say was your greatest accomplishment in that role?
Yeah, in that role, again, is not, none of my people left voluntarily. I had people retire. Unfortunately, a couple have passed away, but nobody left for another job, said, hey, I have another job. I'm leaving. I got a better offer. Never happened. And you know what? This is key. It's not about money. If you ask people about their job, what makes them happy or what's important to them, money, it's up there. But you know what? I bet it's about number 3 on people's list of most important things. There's always one or two things ahead of money that you can satisfy with just the right environment or the right touch or the right way of handling. That's something I've always tried to find out from people. Sometimes I ask the question directly. Sometimes I just figure it out for myself. But, what are those 3 or 5 motivations that drive them? Money's in there. But, I never find that it's number 1.
And so the number 1 thing that you usually find, is it different for everybody, or is there something that sticks out in your head it's
different, but I'm going to tell you the top ones. Flexibility. That's really important. One of the things that I always hated about corporate, you'd work till 8, 9 o'clock for a week straight, okay? Then, Monday I got a dentist appointment. I'm going to be late for an hour. Okay, we got to take an hour, so that's an hour personal time. That's just stupid, And one of the things I did in my department, even though it was against company policy, so you don't tell HR. You tell me, and if HR has a problem with it, they can come to me. And then they're not going to have a problem with it. And that is, you know what? Work is like a bank. That's the way I've always treated it. Sometimes you make a deposit, and sometimes you make a withdrawal. The problem in corporate is they don't want you to make withdrawals. And you know what? I find if you give people that as their general environment, they'll always deposit more than they withdraw. They always do.
You made me think of this. I just had an interview recently where we talked about PTO, or I should say unlimited PTO, that there are some companies that have this. And essentially we were talking about how people are always harder on themselves than you'll ever be on them. So they end up taking less time off, and they sort of like flog themselves over the whole thing.
It's interesting you say that, because, in my company, you have unlimited time. It's unlimited vacation. I don't count days. I mean, we record it on in the payroll system, but there's no, I don't count days, sick days, time off, vacation. You have a vacation, great. Take the time. I can't think of one instance where one of my employees has taken more time than I don't think they take 3 weeks a year. They don't take 2 weeks a year. I have to tell them to take vacation.
Well, it probably says also something about your environment that you've created also, that they don't want to escape all the time.
Yeah, no. They don't. But, like I say, if you have the right people, there are some people who will take terrible advantage of that. And that has to be addressed. But, I had a worker that, she saved time, took 3 weeks. She went overseas to Pakistan, actually, to visit family. And her flight got delayed. And she was 3 days delayed because of her flight and the whole thing. And she ran 3 days over. What's the big deal? What's 3 days? I didn't dock her 3 days pay. And the morale, on that is just terrible. Like I say, I put in all the overtime, and I probably put in an extra, 1,000 hours a year at this place. You're docking me an hour because I have an appointment. No, 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 no.
You sound like a good leader. Very good. Let's say someone is a brand new CPA. Maybe you just hired them. What would be something you might tell them to definitely do or definitely not do?
Okay, the first thing to do, and it sounds kind of, out there, but think. Don't just do your job. Think about the job. Understand why you're doing something. I know you're in a rush to get the tasks done, and you're slow. If you're brand new, you're going to be slow. You're going to think you're fast, but you're slow. But you know what? It's okay. Take the time, learn what you're doing. One of the lessons, I'll give you another war story. When I first did tax, I wanted to be the best tax preparer at this firm. My first tax season ever. I wanted to do more taxes than everybody else. And so I took on any tax return I could get. I was doing them. I probably did 70 tax returns before I finally found out that somebody told someone who told someone else who let somebody know that told me that my tax returns stunk. They were no good. They were terrible. They were wrong. Okay. So I went to the tax department. And I said, I heard that my returns are right. They're like, yeah, we have to redo them. They're terrible. And so, I'm certainly not scoring any points. And said, well, will you show me what I'm doing wrong? Said, no, we don't have time. We're too busy, So, all right. This was the solution I came up with. First of all, I slowed down. Okay. I'm not going to be Speedy Gonzalez through these tax returns. I had a guy that worked there. He was in his 50s, tax expert, and he had 10 kids. Okay, 10 children. You can imagine what this guy looked like when he came into work every day. Yeah. So
works a vacation for him.
Yeah, he never wanted to go home. So he'd get excited when a stamp would come in unstamped on an envelope. He was so tight for money. He'd come in saying, "Oh, a letter came in, and we were able to peel the stamp off and read. This is how excited he." Okay, so I knew he was desperate, and I said, "I'll tell you what. I did a tax return. If you can find 3 mistakes in that tax return, I'll buy you a cup of coffee." So he sat there, and the first one he found 37 mistakes. Okay. Within a couple of weeks, it was down to 5. Finally, the last one, where he was just nitpicking the most subtle thing, couldn't find the 3. And now understand, he was correcting all my tax returns. So now when I put them into the tax department, they were great. They were perfect. So now I started to get this reputation as doing great tax returns. But that's actually how I learned to do a correct tax return. And then after that, I was very good. I still bought him coffee sometimes. But I actually got very, very good at tax. And it's really just filling out the forms. That's all it was back then. And back then, you did them by hand. Today, you put them in a computer. Back then, you actually had to read the tax. When you're doing a tax return, if you're a CPA, read the form. Read every line of that form. It actually starts to make sense.
All right. So we did definitely do. Was there a not do in there, or do we get both of those?
Don't be a data entry clerk. Don't do that. Don't just enter stuff. If you need to get stuff done quickly, that's great. Take stuff off on your own time and try to understand more about it. Don't just enter stuff, outcomes of financial. See what you put in. Where did it wind up on that financial statement? Where did it go? How did it get there? Where'd the other side of it go? Understand that. Accounting is always 2 entries, double entry system. One side, you always have to have another. They don't always know where the other side, okay, I'm entering sales. Where's the other side of that going? And the answer is cash or accounts receivable. That's your answer.
Okay, let's talk about AI. Obviously, it's in the news. They say it's taken over. What do you think is the impact on accounting?
I think it's going to make people think even less. I use it a lot. 2 years ago, I never heard of it. I use it all the time, but I don't use it to think for me. I often use it to double check something I already know. A lot of things in the tax code I know, but maybe they've changed. A lot of changes take place. And I just want to make sure that, you know what? I'm 99% sure, but let me check to be 100%. And there's actually AI that are specially built for tax. And that's what I use. I don't rely on it either because it does come up with wrong answers sometimes. But that being, if it agrees with me, that's great. If it disagrees, then I got to do some work. But
yeah, I mean, my experience, I've used it occasionally, and I definitely see these hallucinations popping up. So I can't imagine if working with, in your career field, that to have it just invent something and someone doesn't catch it. It sounds like someone could get possibly sued, right?
You can't rely on AI. Because if it does a presentation for you, something in that presentation will not be what you want it to be. That is for sure. It may be factually correct, but it's not well presented or whatever else. Often, where I may use it in a case is I have a complex tax code and I need to explain it to somebody. I need to put it in an email. And I'll use AI and I'll have, can you break this down into simple terms? And you get a nice little bullet list, you put that in, you still have to read it and, make sure, but okay, that simplifies it. That's a good use of it. But if you're relying on it or you're actually doing something, the rumor is you could drop financials in it, it'll do a tax return for you. I wouldn't even try that. I mean, I don't care if it does work. But I think, I think it's going to hit all the careers. And I think people are going to think less. College students now are starting to, incorporate this. Somehow they say professors can kind of tell if you've used AI, and that's good, but there'll come a time when you can't. And, that is really an issue. I think people need to think more, understand more, and learn the fundamentals. That's really once you have those, you're good. Then you can do a lot of things, but understand the foundations of whatever your career is.
Yeah. So putting aside the fact that everything you just said, but do you think that it could end up costing people their jobs? Do you think it could end up eating into how many accountants are needed at this firm or that firm or what have you?
I think it will. Yes, I do. I think that's going to be a factor in a lot of different things. The other thing is there's also a certain morphing of professions. So while you get, jobs lost for one area, there's also other opportunities. If you remember an office from the 70s, what did every manager have? A typist, someone to take memos and notations and everything else, and inter-office envelopes, and the guy who delivered those, and all that went away, yet they still have jobs today. They just became something different. And I think those will become something different. I was at the Intuit convention this year, and I thought they way too heavily stressed AI. But the one point that they did make is it will make accountants more financial analysts, more so. Well, if you've got the background to do it, yes. If you're a bookkeeper, no. But so the bookkeeper may get squeezed out, but the accountant may spend less time doing accounting and become a financial analyst.
Okay. All right. Well, tell us about your current firm. And I guess you have an expansion capital project, $3 million.
Yes. Well, we're comprehensive accounting solutions. We have a specialty in hospitality, also in construction, but really we do accounting for any small business. Small business is up to about 25 million in sales. And our key metric are businesses that have multiple locations. There's a lot of things that go on with multiple locations, like in manufacturing, there's taxes, interstate, they have to be handled correctly. A lot of accountants won't handle that. A lot of accountants won't do hospitality because they're very complicated, they're very involved, and they're very granular. There's a lot of things that go on. Just like, the back end of a restaurant, well, the accounting is just like that too. There's a lot of things, a lot of invoices, a lot of stuff that goes on, a lot of payments have to be made. So that's our specialty, and our specialty is also helping, businesses save money on taxes. That's an area. Now, as far as the expansion capital, this is a new area we're getting into. What we're looking to do is help our clients and even non-clients that have good financials but need more money to expand, to provide that capital for them. There's ways of doing it. It's not a loan. We do it through revenue-based financing, which is basically we're purchasing your future revenue. We require multiple revenue streams in order to do that. But what it allows you to do, most places you can make a good business and you can live on that business, but it's very hard to get to that next level, to expand up and have the money to do that. You have to save up to do that and then actually make it happen. So, we help shortcut that process by providing funding anywhere from $250,000 to $3 million, and it helps the businesses grow. So,
okay. And so the name of it is, where are you?
That arm of it is strategic asset management, and all over where everything's located on Long Island. Our offices are in Melville.
Okay. So, but if somebody is if they're out of New York, Kit, do you
we
work
can
with
handle anything across the country.
Oh, okay.
Accounting, tax, financing, funding, whatever you're looking to do, we can handle. We have, numerically speaking, my third largest state in terms of number of clients is California.
Okay. So then it just comes down to your firm understanding the law there and what have you.
Yep.
And then
it's still the same. Sometimes we have to look up certain things. Every jurisdiction is different, but every jurisdiction has codes that you follow.
All right. The lottery question. If you won the lottery tomorrow, would you still do this?
Yes. Anyone would like to win the lottery. But one of the things that I wouldn't like about winning a lottery is people will look at you and look at your success and say, oh, it's because you won the lottery. I want people to see my success because I worked for it. Because, it's something that I did. The car that I drive and the things that I do, I'm not flashy in any way, but, that stuff I earned. That's stuff that I have. I don't want people to think I have it because it was given to me. Nothing's been given to me.
All right, so we're on the speed round now. The speed round has been quite hit or miss. So basically, I'll say some words I found on the internet. You can say whether you're a fan of it or not a fan of it.
Or I don't know.
Or you don't know. Basically, you can say why you like it, don't like it, whatever. Okay, here we go. The big four: the Deloitte, PwC, EY, KPMG.
Worked for one of them. I know them well. If you're there, it's a very, very structured environment. It is extremely rigid. There is no, picture yourself kind of in the military sort of thing, that sort of mentality, that sort of structure. You don't go out of line. You do what you do. Expect long hours. Expect it never to get better. You think you're going to get up to partner? You probably won't. But if you do, it doesn't get better. It just gets more.
Okay. All right. Forensic audit.
A very interesting area of accounting. I find it fascinating. It takes a little finesse and some expertise. That's where you can get creative, because usually you're trying to work on something that's hidden, something that didn't come out in the first pass. And that's where, it's much harder to find something that someone's trying to hide. So that's where it gets interesting.
Okay. All right. Window dressing.
What do we mean by that?
It says short-term adjustments to financial statements at the end of a period to make the company look healthier.
Yeah. My last company that I worked for, the public company, was trying to do that. We had an old management team that was very, very, very successful. They did a great job. They really didn't care what the quarters did. It was the business. We had quarter-over-quarter growth every year. That was great. But the new management came in. And I'll give you an example. They would have people work overtime on a Saturday to push product out so we'd get on the books. The sales would get on the books during that quarter. Well, you're wasting a lot of money doing that. It's costing you more just to buy a better quarter this quarter. And then you'll pull the same for next quarter. It's inefficient. No. I am dead set against window dressing.
Okay. All right. Burn rate.
An important number to understand. Burn rate is basically what you're going through your capital with. So you have $100,000 and you're burning $10,000 a month, you have 10 months to live, basically. That's what a burn rate is telling you. So you want to understand what your burn rate is.
Is that the same as pretty much the same as runway?
Not necessarily, but what a burn rate is going to apply to an unprofitable business or a business that has a negative operating cash flow. That's, as we talked before, how important that was. If you have a positive operating cash flow, you don't have a burn rate.
Okay. Materiality.
Yes, that means lots of things to lots of people. Materiality depends, first of all, on what it is, what you're actually talking about, and how much. So what materiality really means is it too small to really pay attention to and we ignore it, or is it important in and of itself? And normally, it also depends on the size you're comparing it to. So if you have we had to explain variances in our financials. $5,000 was immaterial. $100,000 we had to explain what took place. That was that. But that's not always, the case. Materiality, when you're analyzing as an auditor, legal fees, there really is no materiality. Put $50 to a law firm. Why did you pay $50 to the law firm? Is there a potential lawsuit coming? Is there something you consulted about? We need to know. That's, so it's small, very small, but yet you need to know.
Yeah. All right. Clawbacks.
That refers often in bankruptcies. There's also other reasons for it, but what a clawback basically says is that if you, I'll give you an example in bankruptcy. There's a clawback, I believe it's 45 days, that if you paid bills, they may require that vendor to return that so that they become part of the bank. So this way, you're not favorably paying somebody that you did. You paid them at the end, said, "Hey, you're my uncle, I'll pay you," and then go bankrupt. And then you have a clawback. Clawbacks also applied, like in Bernie Madoff, if you remember that. Some investors got more money than others, and what it was basically they wanted everybody to be even. Maybe you cashed out, you got some profits out of that. They clawed that back. So clawbacks are unnecessary. If you're subject to them, you're going to hate them.
Okay. How about a haircut? A percentage reduction in the value of an asset, often referred to as a loss taken by an investor.
Yeah, that's a common everyday thing. Basically, you're devaluing something for a particular reason. So it's not worth as much as it was. Think of it a little bit like depreciation, only it's not. But it's trimming the value of something because it's not worth as much.
Okay, and the last one was double entry. I think you already talked about that for a moment.
I mean, that's what accounting is built on. It really is a genius system. It really is. Once you understand it, it's flawless. It was invented hundreds of years ago, and it works very, very well.
All right. Well, then we're on the last question here, Doug. And answer this any way you want. What is a secret that most people do not know about being a CPA?
I think actually how much of an impact you can actually have. It is a mundane career. But it doesn't have to be. There's a lot of things. I mean, I influence a lot of businesses. I talk to a lot of people. In the pandemic, I mean, this was a really big thing. We were in the restaurant industry, okay? Restaurant and hotels. Nobody got hit harder, really, than them. I mean, they were shut down. It was terrible. We had 160 locations at the beginning of the pandemic. We came out of the pandemic and 159 were still in business. So that, were we responsible for that? No, I'd say in 80%, we had nothing to do with them being successful. But in 20%, I'd say, yes, we had a lot to do with them staying in business. And that's really what, that's a surprising fact. And, you can have a tremendous influence on people, on businesses, on people's lives. You can make a difference, even with something as simple as a pen and pencil.
Awesome. All right, Doug Carpenter. I really appreciate you coming on Tales from the Shift. This has been fantastic learning all about your world.
Thank you very much. Appreciate being here.